Cut off there. It sounded like it was a technical issue, but anyway, appreciate it very much. All right, let's talk about a proposal for the Fargo Diversion project that could double the project's potential special assessment for Cass County property owners that caused quite a stir last week. We're joined in studio today by Mark Brodshaug, who is the head of the Cass County Joint Water Board and also chair of the Diversion Assessment Committee. Brodshaug, am I saying that right?
Yes, that's correct.
How are you, Mark?
I'm fine, thanks.
Appreciate you joining us. And also Dustin, Gawrylow, who is the managing director of the North Dakota Watchdog Network. Hey, Dustin, how are you?
Good morning, Scott.
All right, so Mark, maybe start with what's new here. Obviously, this is a way to help pay for the diversion, and caused quite a stir when folks hear about special assessments doubling. What's behind the proposal? Explain this for us.
First off, I want to say that the cost of the project hasn't changed. The last estimate of the total cost of the project is $1.8 billion. We're not changing how we're talking about paying for it. There'll be a federal funding stream, a state funding stream, and a local funding stream. That part hasn't changed. What's changing is how we're going to build the project. It's going to require financing. When you go to build a house, you need the money now, you need the house now, but your income is over a number of years, so you don't wait and build a little bit of a house every year. You build the house and you borrow money and you pay it back over time. Same thing with building this project. We'll have federal funds dribbling in. You know, some years we may get a bigger appropriation, some years we might not get an appropriation, so that'll come in over a number of years. State funding will come in biennium by biennium. They've appropriated money the last 3 bienniums and have a kind of a commitment that they intend to go up to $450 million over time, but that isn't sitting in the bank ready to go right now. Local funding will come from sales taxes that have already been approved by voters in Cass County and in the city of Fargo, and that'll come in over the 20-year life of the sales taxes. So to build the project, we need the money now to get construction going, and it'll be paid back over time. So when we talk about doubling the potential bonds that'll be backed by special assessments, we're talking about a financing tool, how to build the project in the manner that'll save taxpayers money on financing costs and build the project earlier, which will also save, hopefully, some big money for the taxpayers.
All right, so obviously everybody likes to save money, but what about this story of the potential special assessments doubling?
Yes, and so how we're planning to do construction is we need to sell some bonds to pay the construction expenses that'll be paid back over time by sales tax. Sales tax funding is in place. It's been voted on by the taxpayers, but it comes in over a 20-year period. And if the city and the county just go to sell bonds backed only by the sales tax revenue, it will not allow much bonding capacity. Bonds just backed by a revenue stream alone has a limitation on how much you can borrow. They don't allow, the bondholders don't allow any growth in sales tax to enter into the calculation, so you're limited in how much you can borrow. It also comes at a slightly higher interest rate than if you have bonds backed both by the sales taxes and a potential special assessment against property. So there's 2 ways we can save money there, by borrowing by using special assessment backed bonds. We'll build the project faster, which everybody knows. You have less effects of inflation, you have more efficiencies in construction, and that might be a big deal. If we can build it in 10 years instead of 15 years, let's say, the savings could be huge. And of course, everybody knows what we're trying to avoid is the flood that destroys Fargo, Moorhead, West Fargo area. And if you have a flood 12 years from now that would destroy the developed area, if we can have a project completed in year 10, it makes a lot of difference versus year 15. So savings in speeding construction is a big thing, and also the interest rate factor. If we can save just a 1/4 point interest on by using special assessment backed bonds, it amounts to millions of dollars over the course of the bond.
And the special assessment doubling is essentially the collateral that you don't intend ever to be collected.
That's the intent. The sales tax will pay the bond payments. If something happened, if we ended up with a local depressed economy and sales taxes wouldn't collect enough to pay things, there may be a point where, you know, it'd be like co-signers on a note when you go into.
So this is essentially creative financing. You're getting creative to get this done quicker, financed. The collateral is put in place with the special assessment district, but the sales tax is ultimately the funding mechanism. You don't see funding.
Exactly.
All right. So Dustin, Gawrylow, North Dakota Watchdog Network, your watchdog antenna have gone off because of this. Tell us why.
Well, the idea of levying special assessments against property and then saying that, oh, it won't ever be collected. And then later on in the article actually quoted, if it were collected, such and such would happen. Well, you know, the idea that special assessments can be levied against property is fine for a project like this. It's an infrastructure project. We're not quibbling with the project. There's enough people arguing which direction to go on the project. What we're focusing in on is the impact to the individual taxpayers and their property values and their property, and the whole concept of placing a assessment that won't be collected. You know, that's going to have an effect on property values. There's no way around it. Special assessment balances always have an effect on property values. When you go to sell your house, the first thing the buyer is going to do is say, oh, well, you got that special balance there. How about you bring down your price? I mean, that's just common sense. And so that's the perspective that we're bringing on this discussion.
All right. And what would you say in response to that, Mark?
I agree, and we've been upfront about that. The intent is that the assessment would never have to be paid by the local property owner, but from what we understand, it'll show up when somebody comes to buy your property. It'll show up as a liability against the property. So that's why we're very clear up front on the amount of the potential assessment that we're going to be starting to talk about, and the effect. Even if you don't pay it, there is an impact on your property because it's kind of a contingent liability out there. So mostly I agree with the statements there. This is one option we're looking at. This is the start of a big discussion, public discussion on this that will end up in a vote by everybody that is going to be asked to sort of co-sign on the assessment bonds. There'll be a public vote at the end of this. So we're beginning to talk to some local public entities, West Fargo City Commission, Horace City Council. Some of those we've met with Cass County Commission. So we'll talk to the entities first and at public meetings, so there'll be input from the public. And we anticipate having a full-blown public information session starting this fall and possibly go to a vote late in the winter is kind of the schedule. So this is the start of a public process, and we want to be up front. And that's part of the reason to change our messaging, let's say, as we start talking to people, is let's talk about the high end of the range we've been talking about for financing, so we don't surprise people later on.
All right, hold that thought. We'll talk more about a creative financing proposal for the diversion for flood protection in the Fargo-Moorhead region when we come back with our guests. Stay tuned. That continues after this.
Serving the Northern Plains, this is What's on Your Mind. Back to more of your calls straight ahead.
All right, back to our conversation now with Mark Brodshaug, who is the head of the Cass County Joint Water Board, chair of the Diversion Assessment Committee, as well as Dustin Gawrylow, managing director of the North Dakota Watchdog Network. We're talking about the $1.8 billion proposed diversion that would protect a chunk of the region around Fargo-Moorhead from long-term flood protection. Story out last week about a new proposal on how that would be financed that could double the project's potential special assessments for Cass County property owners. What Mark and Dustin have been talking about here today have been about the financing mechanism for that. Any questions or comments, welcome for them today on the program. 800-228-0550, 701-258-0550. Here's a call that came in during the break.
A question for your diversion supporter. Please ask him, where am I going to get the extra money to pay for the special assessments that are going to result from this boondoggle to fatten the pocketbooks of the local Fargo developers.
All right, couple of questions in there to tackle, Mark.
Well, the first answer is that sales tax is anticipated to make the payments on these bonds. So the property owners typically wouldn't actually pay it. It would show up as a liability against their property, and that liability would drop every year as payments are made on their behalf. There could be a maintenance levy, is usually a feature of a special assessment district on water projects like this, and that'll be a decision for another time if sales tax will also pay for the maintenance, but the assessment district can also be used for a perpetual maintenance, and that is probably more likely the property owner may have an annual maintenance bill for this, but that would be a very minor item. You know, it would be in the tens of dollars a year for a homeowner, and so.
What about his assertion that this is all about, developers? I think his line was lining the pockets of developers.
I think the project is designed to protect the current footprint of Fargo-Moorhead area. We're looking for a robust project. That was part of the intent of this, something that's going to be on the ground here for 200-300 years probably. So, you know, we need to maintain the project, but the developers of today are not the people we're trying to protect.
Back to the financing mechanism, Dustin, if not what this group has suggested as the way to go to fast-track this, that ultimately the sales tax pays for it, but the collateral, for lack of a better term, is the special assessment district, do you have a different suggestion or an alternative?
Well, I think that there's lots of ways that this could be done. I think the real question is, when you are making this assertion that it will never be collected, does that mean that the city of Fargo or Cass County is going to issue a notary, an official document to property owners that they can give to their bank when they go to sell their property that says, don't worry, this special is not really a special that's going to get collected? Because what's going to happen is banks are going to look at this as a liability, as Mark just said, and they're going to factor that into how much a prospective buyer is going to be able to loan to buy that property. So those property owners, if the Fargo and the folks that are supporting this plan are really, believe that this will never be collected from the property tax owners, they should come up with a way to assure people and give them an official document that their bank can, take it as true in this process. Otherwise, you're looking at a situation where property values could be diminished. And in fact, if there's a situation where folks owe a lot on their property because property values have been going through the roof, we haven't been affected in North Dakota by the national decline. And, at what point does this affect this guarantee that it's not going to be collected? At what point does that get put on paper so that it is official and that people can actually go to the bank with it?
And that's a question we're going to have to save for after the break, as well as a comment from Larry in North Fargo, who wants to know a little bit about the financing mechanism as well. So, gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind hanging in there, we will take a break for news and a few announcements, and continue this on the other side of the break. Larry, your question first when we come back, and then we'll give Mark a chance to address Dustin's point on assurances for taxpayers. More coming up.
We want to know what's on your mind.
It's another hour of What's on Your Mind with Todd Mitchell. I'm Scott Helen. Todd Mitchell, who's the beneficiary today of that peach cream cheese pie. One of our fine listeners. So you ready to hit the fridge a little later, the break room, and
yes.
partake? Yes.
I'm relieved to know it's actually, I haven't been over there, but We've got a big enough fridge that if you want to hide something in there, you can actually hide it and people won't discover it. It's amazing.
And this, by the way, was no easy feat, just so you know, because the pie needed to be refrigerated. So, you know.
Well, the clever thing to do is to get those sandwich bags that look like moldy sandwiches, so people look at it and.
No, wait till you see.
I'm not going to steal that.
It wouldn't even fit in a sandwich bag. They don't make them big enough. It's a monster.
Well, in this case, it would be a bigger bag, but she also
Sheila
did mention
Moffat, by the way,
Sheila mentioned that she was going to hit us up at the North Dakota State Fair, because I know I'll be up there a week from Wednesday with the game and fish guys kind of hanging out at their pond and stuff. And she said, well, I'll bring some pie by then. So
there's a photo
always
of
good
it
to have that
up
second
at,
round of
Facebook
pie
page.
ready to come out,
Exactly. Anyway, thanks to Sheila Moffat of Minot, who is the award-winning pie maker of the peach cream cheese pie. Had won a number of awards at Hustfest and at the State Fair, and prompted us to say, it's maybe time to revisit the pie tasting contest. So we're working on that. And some others on Facebook agreed over the weekend. Another hour of What's on Your Mind. Drew Wrigley, too busy for us today, the Attorney General, to maybe he's gone big time now because of the whole Paul McCartney thing. So.
Maybe he's trying to get his hearing back.
In fairness to him, we did suggest this rather late, last night once we found out he met Sir Paul. But anyway, we'll schedule that for another time. We have lots of time to get to your calls on any and all topics today on What's on Your Mind. We're going to finish our conversation from last hour, however, on financing flood protection in Fargo Moorhead, specifically the $1.8 billion diversion project that is certainly on the radar of everyone watching water issues throughout the state. And so we'll continue with our guests here. Any questions or comments you have for them, they'll be here for one more segment, and then we'll get back to the phones on any and all topics. David in San Francisco is still ticking people off, too. And specifically on his comments about Barry Goldwater and the Vietnam War. So a few comments coming in off here. We'll get to those as we go throughout the morning. Here's how you join us, 800-228-0550, 701-258-0550, studio at whatsonyourmindradio.com. Just to reset, we're talking today about a new proposal by proponents of the flood diversion that would protect folks in the Fargo-Moorhead area from future floods. $1.8 billion project. The proposal that's new is one that would allow for a fast track of the project to get it built, but using a collateral mechanism of special assessments. What the proponents are saying is the collateral system, actually the special assessment, is there to allow the fast track of the financing of this, but ultimately the special assessments will not be levied because the mechanism to pay this is the sales tax. So it would be a fallback, if you will, that if the funds were not there from the sales tax to finance this, then the special assessments would kick in. But what they're telling us is that's not anticipated to happen. Anyway, so that's the debate, and explaining all this for us today is Mark Brodshaug, who is the head of the Cass County Joint Water Board, chair of the Diversion Assessment Committee, and Dustin Gawrylow, managing director of the North Dakota Watchdog Group, who's just saying this is worrisome for taxpayers opposing this financing mechanism. So you're hearing on both sides of this debate today. All right, so before the break, Dustin raised some issues that you needed to address, Mark, specifically. Just to recap the question?
I think his question was, what can property owners take to the bank? We're promising or making the statement that sales tax is going to make the payments on their behalf, and they won't have to pay them, but there's still a liability out there for them. And that is a concern for us. We have to be clear in our messaging that, our projections show that sales tax can make the annual payments on bonds, but it's still out there. And if something changes, if the economy goes into a slower period, growth in sales tax revenue isn't as great as it used to be, or if we end up at we're talking a range of $450 to $900 million is what we've been talking about for potential bonds. If we end up at the high end of that range, the sales taxes would need to be extended in order to cover the payment. So at the high end of the range, something would have to change. Otherwise, the special assessments would kick in. So it's part of our duty to be clear that we're projecting that sales tax can make the payments, but there is a contingent liability out there that property owners could end up paying at least part of the assessment.
Dustin, there's your answer. Any comment?
Well, I think that saying we're never going to collect this, but there's a contingency situation where we could, that's the problem that property owners should worry about. And I know in the article they called it an uncertified special assessment. Well, what's the process for certifying it so that it does have to be paid? Are the people going to be asked that question on the ballot later on if it comes down to that, or will it just be an automatic vote of the board? I think that this really comes down to answering questions and whether there is an impact on the economy. This plan, is there a situation where these liabilities could impact the property market in Fargo-Moorhead and in Cass County in general? That it could create a situation where there's an economic impact of these special assessments. Whether it's real or not, there could be a perception. And, we all know that the economy is half perception and half psychological anyway in most cases. And so what are the firewalls against this financial proposal actually having an impact on the economy, even if nobody ever has to pay these special assessments? Where is the contingency for that?
All right, a few questions in that, Mark.
Yeah, I should mention also that on the macro scale, there would likely be some sort of a pledge type of document that would pledge the sales tax revenue from the city and the county to the bond repayments. So there would be some legal documents likely in order to satisfy bondholders and make them willing to buy the bonds for these. So on a global scale, there would be some legal commitment from the city and county. But on the individual property owners' side, they are going to have some risk, however slight, to do that. As far as the economic impact of having kind of this contingent liability out there, that it's probably real. It probably affects homes with large specials now. Homes that have no specials, maybe it gets factored into the sales price versus a house with large specials. But in the new growth areas of Fargo and West Fargo, there's some, huge specials on houses, and it seems like they get snapped up also. So
only a couple of minutes left here, but Dustin, is your point rather than go with this rather creative financing proposal that just take longer to get the thing built?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I think that it's going to take long enough to get built the way it is, but the property owners that are backing this and the local taxpayers need to know what they're actually paying for. And the idea that this is only contingent upon the sales tax not generating, well, it's also contingent upon the project staying within budget. And we all know government projects do not have a good track record, if any, of staying on budget and on time. And so if this project goes 20 or 30% over, is that part of the contingency as well? Because it's one thing to rely and say that this is only contingent upon the revenue stream on the sales tax side, but what if the cost factor is higher? Is that also a trigger for this becoming an actual liability? And so those various questions need to be answered.
Okay, another call from a listener here, too.
Hi, guys. How you doing? I just wanted to suggest that the condition the economy is in, and if it would really go south, which, I mean, if you don't look at the bright sunshine every day and a little gloom and doom added here, that maybe it would really go south. So then sales are going to drop. There'd be no sales tax revenues. So then, in a bind, the property owners would be stuck with more taxes. That never happened.
All right, about 30 seconds for your answer, Mark, and maybe you want to wrap in a comment to finish for Dustin, too.
Well, we need to predict the future, and usually you fall back on what's happened in the past. So you look back on history in Fargo-Moorhead and sales taxes, and there is some years where there is no growth, but generally sales taxes have grown every year, and you apply a trend line to it. You can argue, is it going to grow at 3% or 5% over the next 20 or 30 years is probably the range of probable outcomes, but we have to recognize it could not grow for a year or two in there. So.
All right, we'll keep watching this. Two perspectives on this creative financing proposal for the diversion project. Thank you both for your time today. Mark, Dustin, thanks. Back to your calls next on What's on Your Mind.
Like us.